I was 2 steps from the overlook when someone's fingers slid under my elbow, sweet as a daughter's help, and shoved. I went backward into black water, my hearing filling with a chorus of insects, and, above all that, my daughter-in-law's voice measuring out my life in minutes. 15, she breathed, like a prayer. That's all I need to get back to the safe and change your husband's will. Comment where you're watching from, because you won't believe how this ends. I didn't drown. I didn't scream. I caught a cypress knee with both hands and let the swamp close over me while Sloane, too clever by half, waited at the railing for bubbles and crocodiles that never came. My name is Evelyn Hart, I am 70 years old, and I am nobody's easy ending. I was married to Thomas Hart for 48 years. He built docks and warehouses along the coast, bought dirt when dirt was cheap, and held on. People called it foresight when we both knew it was stubbornness blessed by timing. He died a week before the push peacefully, hand in mine, with the taste of lemon ice on his tongue because he never outgrew his sweet tooth. The estate papers weren't finalized yet. The original will, a stubborn, old-fashioned thing with blue ink signatures and a coffee ring from a night of bad baseball, was in the safe at our house on Indigo Marsh Road. Crocodiles, Sloane had whispered to herself when she thought I couldn't hear. As if the Everglades cared about the precision of her vocabulary. We were an hour south of them anyway, where the water forgets where it ends and the sky begins. She led me out there for fresh air, for a little healing walk, just us girls. My son Daniel had gone to pick up takeout with the grandkids. It was just us and the pretended comfort of the boardwalk's rail. 15 minutes, she'd said. 15 to run home, crack the safe, swap pages, and slide back into the kitchen with lipstick like a bruise and a story ready for every second of my silence. It was a good plan. It was even close to being original. But Sloane never had to survive a farm summer where the river had moods and the mud could hug you to death. She never climbed out of anything scarier than a Pilates class. The water was warm and thick as bread dough. An egret lifted itself into evening, its legs slow as I sank. My hands wrapped around that knob of root. It scraped my palm and I welcomed the pain. I counted with her, only backward, because I've never believed in giving time the satisfaction of being finished before I am. 15, 14. Above me, boards creaked. Sloane's perfume, gardenia and sugar, hung in the humidity like a lie. She waited just long enough to feel poetic about it, I'm sure. The widow swallowed by swamp, the perfect alibi laminated by shock. Then her phone vibrated. I felt rather than heard it. She whispered, now, and her heels clipped away. 13, 12. I took my first breath of bog and spat it out. I loosened my legs, let the silt suck, and then rotated until both knees found the same root that had kept my fingers from becoming bones. I worked along a rope of cypress knees, hauling myself under the lip of the boardwalk to a rib of dry wood. There's always a seam in catastrophe where the world gives you a grip. People miss it because panic is louder. I have lived long enough to know panic is a choice you can make once and regret forever. 9, 8, 7. I slid along until there was a break in the guard slats, a place utilities crews use. I wedged my shoulder up between them like a stubborn letter jammed in a mailbox and heaved. The wood gave me a cough and a bruise. Then the swamp, deciding it had been entertained, let me go. I came up under the boardwalk, not on it. You learn that trick if you grew up in a place where brothers hide and little sisters learn to be slippery. On my belly, elbows pulling, I dragged myself across the narrow strip of mud between pilings and the brush. I lay there, breathing marsh and iron and summer, and listened to Sloane's car open and close on the far side of the parking lot. 6, 5. I turned my wedding band under my thumb, the way I did through chemo with Thomas and through every waiting room since. Then I started walking. There is an airboat concession 2 miles from that overlook. The owner, a man with sun-like leather stitched to his face, was closing up when he saw the old lady who looked like a mangrove root had learned to talk. "Ma'am," he said, grabbing a towel. "You've fallen." "Someone hoped I'd stay," I said. "Can I borrow a phone?" He didn't ask questions. I dialed the one number I had memorized while Thomas still had breath enough to answer. "Ruth," I said when my lawyer picked up, voice crisp and already reading the weather inside my words. "It's Evelyn. It's happening." I'm listening, Ruth said. She was a velvet hammer kind of woman, polished, quiet, steady. It's a particular comfort when venom makes noise. She pushed me off the boardwalk at Indigo Marsh. Thought she'd catch crocodiles doing the Lord's work. She said she needs 15 minutes to switch the will. No one is touching that will, Ruth said. Because you and I don't practice hope as a plan. Do you remember what we put in the safe? I smiled, though my mouth tasted algae. A decoy that looks better than the Mona Lisa. And a little something my grandson calls a snitch. Ruth allowed herself a breath that might have been a laugh in another century. I'll meet you at the house. Come the back way, Mrs. Hart. We had prepared the week Thomas exhaled his last. People grieve in casseroles and chaos. They say they're helping and then pilfer time with their quiet rearrangements of your life. I had wanted to believe Sloane would simply set her hooks into my son's future, where it's customary, and leave me to the ruins I've earned. But there had been enough small rumors and skipped kindnesses in the past years to tell me that the woman my son loved had a needle for a soul. So Ruth and I had tucked a few needles of our own into velveteen places. The first was a camera the size of a vitamin gummy inside the safe's frame. It turned on when the door did and hummed into a cloud account that belonged to a book club that never met. The second was the decoy will, a perfect twin with 3 imperfections that would sing to anyone who looked too closely. Under ultraviolet light, my signature glowed with a hidden line from a poem Thomas loved. A forensic printer tech owed Ruth a favor. The seal on page 3 carried a microdot with our firm's case number so small it would hide behind a fly's eyelash. And the steel of the safe, beloved by Thomas for its stubborn weight, now housed what Ruth called a polite little monster, a transmitter tuned to page separation. Pull a staple and my phone would purr. Lift a sheet and the cloud would wake. I am tired, Thomas had said that last week, voice thin as hospital ice. But not of you. Don't let them make you small, Evie. He was a builder. He believed locks were for honest people and time cured most betrayals. I wasn't made to argue with ghosts, but when I looked at the bed after he was gone, I thought of all the things time does not heal. We taped our little monsters in place. Now I had swamp in my hair and a war to finish. The airboat man drove me as far as the old maintenance road at the back of Indigo Marsh Road, where palmetto and old live oaks make shade thick enough to hide a small army. Do I need to call someone? He asked. He had the eyes of a man who'd hauled strangers out of worse. You'll hear a siren before you see it, I said, and gave him a tip his hand refused twice before accepting, because you don't argue with a woman who will not be dead on schedule. I cut through the woods, stripped Marsh off my cardigan, and came up behind the magnolia hedge that runs along the service path to our garage. Every house like ours, money made before all the fancy words, has a place where deliveries come in and secrets go out. I slid my key into the second door, not the first, and went straight to the pantry, to the tiny porcelain knob that Thomas had once joked was where you hide the good bourbon and your better intentions. It wasn't a knob. Pull, tilt, twist. The small wall panel gave, and I waited. Footsteps. A familiar clatter. A voice in the foyer that could pass for my son's guilt if you didn't know better. I told you to pick up more napkins, Dan, Sloane said loud enough to be overheard. Mom will want this dinner to feel normal. I closed my eyes and listened in the same way I smelled roses at funerals, trying to separate grief from the perfume that pretends to honor it. The pantry shares a wall with Thomas's office. You can hear the safe click through its bricks if you put your ear to the dollhouse door where my grandchildren once hid playing spies. I crouched, tilted my head. In the pantry's dimness, I could see a sliver of soft lamplight through the seam and the edge of a shoe, a heel with a gold inlay that looked like a serpent eating its tail. The first click was the coded keypad. 1969, the year Daniel was born. The second was the hiss of the pressure seal. And then, like a little bell in muffled heaven, my phone purred. Ruth arrived the way good lawyers do, from nowhere and everywhere at once. Her footfalls were nothing. Her perfume was nothing. But her voice, through the tiny earpiece she'd insisted I wear during my walk, "It will make me feel better," Evelyn, was cool as relief. "We're live," she whispered. "The camera's up. She's in a cream dress with a stain at the hem. She's pulling pages. And oh, look at that. There's our snake." Snake. Gold heel. I'd know that shoe in a courtroom. All right, she's folding the original under a magazine. She's placing the decoy. Bless her heart. She's smoothing the seal with her thumbnail as if friction could erode a microdot. Don't blink, I said. She'll steal your eyelashes. Your son? Ruth asked, because there are wounds only old friends can lance without making you bleed to death. Picking up dinner, I said. Or he's been sent to. When he looks at Sloane, he counts like a man whose debts have been rearranged. And your grandchildren? 2 kids who think marshmallows are a food group. I will not let them remember tonight by the hours it stole from them. On the other side of the wall, the soft thwop of pages, the clap of the safe, the little hum of ambition that people hide under grief like a dog under a table. Sloane exhaled. Done, she said to herself. Then, louder, Daniel? Did you get the napkins? The doorbell rang. Not Daniel. The world's most convenient coincidence arrived in the form of a delivery man who had the wrong address and enough patience to keep ringing until anyone, say, a woman who had just committed 3 felonies with a manicure, had to answer. While she was at the door, I slid through the service hall to the laundry room, where the old storm radio still sat from hurricane season. I turned the dial up just enough to cover the sound of Ruth's soft chuckle in my ear. It's all there, Ruth said. Her whole performance. We won't need to argue with a soul about it. Now go wash your hands, Evelyn. You smell like victory and swamp, and only one of those photographs well. I scrubbed until the little cuts on my palms stung clean. I brushed my hair with the cheap brush I kept for painting, tied it with a ribbon that Thomas liked because it made me look like the heroine in a paperback no one admits to loving, and stepped into the hallway. Sloane's face when she saw me was a sacrament. Shock, then calculation, then something like admiration trying not to be frightened. She wore grief like a borrowed coat, and it didn't fit. Wah, Mom, she said, and her voice couldn't find an ending. What happened to you? You took so long. We were worried. I slipped, I said, and moved past her into Thomas's office like the room obeyed me because it always had. The boardwalk rail is slick this time of year. Did Daniel get napkins? Yes, she said, eyes flicking once toward the safe, then back to my face with speed a cat would respect. I sent him and the kids so you and I could have a quiet moment. I know how much you love Thomas. I wanted it to be just us. Just us, I said, the way you say a prayer over food you aren't sure you should eat. Then let's not waste a moment. We didn't. We ate dinner at the kitchen island because the table felt like a ceremony we hadn't earned yet. Daniel came back with fried chicken and coleslaw as if we were celebrating a ball game. The children, Maya with sauce on her nose, Theo with a Daniel Tiger band-aid on his elbow, told me they had learned how to whistle in the car. Sloane smiled as if she had invented the sun. I counted 4 deep breaths that did not choke me. After, when plates were rinsed and the sticky child was unstuck, I said, let's sleep. Morning has a way of making sense of what evening cannot. No one argued. Grief makes cowards of the loud and quiet angels of the patient. I lay in bed under the quilt my mother made, called Ruth with 1 button, and listened to my house reside in its bones. Tomorrow at 9, Ruth said. At my office, the reading. You'll wear the gray suit you wore when Thomas retired. I'll bring the ultraviolet lamp in my purse. I'll ask for the original. I will be pompous about chain of custody. She will interrupt. She will, I said. And when she does, Ruth continued, you will let her, because we are going to give her the floor and then show her what it feels like to fall through it. I knew we were friends for a reason, I said, and slept like a woman who has work to do. In the morning, the house was full of polite noises. Daniel scrolled. The children clacked Lego bricks and negotiated the Geneva Convention in their playground voices. Sloane's heels made tiny storms across tile. I watched her tuck something into her tote that looked like a glossy magazine and smelled like fear. She handed me coffee. I accepted kindness if not the source. We drove downtown under a sky so blue it would have been disrespectful to cry. Ruth's office, a clean rectangle of oak and light, was already full. 2 of Thomas's former partners sat on one side of the table with faces set like clocks that had just learned about midnight. A notary showed his stamp the way a deacon shows his hymn book. Ruth stood when I walked in, because she remembers the old manners that make new wars winnable. I'm sorry for your loss, the notary said, and meant it. Thank you, I said, and meant nothing. We began. The law clerk read through the routine like a man who could do it in his sleep. Bequests to the Children's Education Trust. Pour over to the Hart Family Foundation. Remainder to the surviving spouse. Requests no large fuss at graveside. I felt Thomas beside me the way I sometimes feel rain before it decides to fall. He had left scraps of himself in the margins of our life. This felt like one of them, a line of ink becoming a day. Then Ruth folded her hands on the table. We'll need the original to finalize filings with the registry, she said, law polite. The original? Sloane said, as if tastefully surprised to be included. Why? Isn't the copy sufficient? The copy is an exhibit, Ruth said. Her voice was gentle water that hides a current. The original is the river we cross. Might we have it, Mrs. Hart? I smiled at her use of my name. Of course, I said. It's in the office safe. But I must have left it on the desk last night when I took out the photographs Thomas wanted on the mantel. Sloane, dear, would you fetch it? You know where I keep it. There are moments when people feel themselves chosen by fate. The skin on Sloane's face did that thing, tightened then lifted, as if destiny had called her by her better name. Certainly, she said, and rose with her tote. Back in a flash. She had it in 15 minutes, because some stories like symmetry. She walked in with the magazine, Coastal Living, folded over a stack of legal blue. She set it down with the reverence of a bride laying a bouquet. The notary leaned forward out of habit. Ruth did not touch it. Do you mind? Ruth asked, nodding at the stack. I've developed an unfortunate obsession with paper. Be my guest, Sloane said. Ruth wasn't a magician. She was better. She slid the little ultraviolet torch from her purse as casually as if she were fishing for a tissue. She clicked it on, a soft violet halo, and passed it slowly over the signature page. My name, Evelyn Margaret Hart, sat in ink I recognized by the way my hand remembered it. Then, in soft script only a ghost could have written, the line Thomas had once scrawled in a love letter appeared beneath, for the long, long time. Ruth smiled, a small thing, private as a secret between old women at a noisy wedding. Ah, she said. There's our husband. What? Sloane asked, voice too quick to be innocent. Ruth lifted the lamp. A hobby, she said. We have a forensics lab that likes to play with pens. I'll need to log the seal as well for our files. She tilted the corner of the page under the light. The notary leaned in, professional curiosity piqued. He squinted, then frowned. That's not our case number, he said. No, Ruth replied, voice still mild. Ours begins with 23-, not 32-. And this dot, so tiny I nearly forgot it, doesn't appear at all on the scan we made of Mr. Hart's original when we drew the bequest revisions last spring. Silence. People think silence is a gap. It isn't. It's a ladder turned on its side. What are you saying? Daniel asked, because sons ask questions they should not have to ask. I'm saying, Ruth answered, that this document is a counterfeit. A very, very good counterfeit. Someone with access to fine paper, fine seals, and a brave heart for crime spent time with it. Someone who had 15 minutes alone with a safe. The notary sat back. One of Thomas's partners cleared his throat with a sound like a shovel hitting stone. Sloane laughed, the kind of sound women make when they think you've told a bitter joke. This is ridiculous, she said, and slid her eyes to me, daring me to be a fool in front of men who wear their names stitched in their shirt cuffs. Evelyn is grieving. She must have misplaced the real one. Perhaps the lamp is dirty. Perhaps. The nice thing about perhaps, Ruth cut in, is how beautifully it sits next to proof. She clicked the ultraviolet lamp off. Mrs. Hart. I'd been quiet because war is often grading papers with a red pen while someone else lectures. Now I reached into my purse and set a small gray device on the table, scarcely bigger than the coast of a state you can drive across in an afternoon. What is that? Daniel asked. The polite monster, I said. It blinked one green eye. Ruth raised one eyebrow. It logs the exact time the will came out of the safe last night and exactly how long the pages were separated. It does not know what crocodiles are, but it does know minutes. 15, to be exact. It also took a little video as a treat. I clicked the button. The little screen filled with our office from ankle height. The safe door opened. A heel with a gold serpent stepped into frame. Two hands, the nails painted a harmless lady pink, lifted out papers, slid in others, smoothed a seal. A face bent to the work with the concentration of a saint over a needle. She looked up once, checking the door, and for that half-second the lens had her. "No," Daniel said. He said it like a boy who wanted the world to be wheat instead of chaff, good instead of complicated. "Sloane, my daughter-in-law did something I will give her credit for. She didn't pretend it wasn't her." She straightened. She let her face go quiet. Then she looked at me with a kind of cool admiration that is the closest we will ever come to love. "You crawled out," she said. "I did," I answered. "And you let me do it anyway." "You gave me a number," I said. 15 minutes is a lifetime when you know how to use it." Ruth cleared her throat, because she is a conductor, and we were her uncooperative orchestra. "Mrs. Pike." "Hart," Sloane snapped, too fast. "My name is Hart." "Not in my files," Ruth said, without rancor. "In my files you are still the woman who showed up at a husband's hospital room with a draft of a power of attorney you claimed he had asked you to print." "He had not. He was sleeping. We wrote you a polite letter about that. You did not reply. I see your ambition learned a better dress, but not better manners." Sloane went very still. "It is possible to admire even the enemy's backbone." "Daniel," she said, turning to my son, making her eyes big in the way that had worked on him for years. "Your mother she's doing this because she never liked me. Because Thomas never." "Stop," Daniel said, and the word did not sound like anything she could climb. It had weight. He stared at his hands, at the desk, at the corner of the magazine that still covered the fold of the true original. "He was a good boy once. I wasn't sure what that makes a man." Finally, he said, "Tell me you didn't push her." I hadn't told him that part. I waited. Sloane's mouth did a small, precise thing. "She slipped," she said. "The boardwalk was wet." I set my phone on the table next to the monster, its dull case suddenly bright as a knife. "A gift from Theo," I said. "He likes gadgets." "It's a watch that records heart rate and conversations during exercise. I didn't ask it to, but it is a very helpful, nosy little thing." "Would you like to hear the part where you said 15 minutes or the part where you said crocodiles?" "Evelyn," Daniel whispered. It wasn't a plea. It was a shock thawing into something that could finally feel. Ruth's assistant, young, competent, iron stapler in her soul, stepped into the room then and stood by the door in a way that made every man at the table sit taller. There are women whose competence is a siren everyone obeys if they want to keep their ship. "I've called the authorities," Ruth said gently. "We'll finish the reading by the book with the original document, and then we'll let the state decide what color bracelets fit a woman who attempts to alter a will after staging an accident." "Bracelets." Sloane laughed one last time, and it was almost a pity, the way people tell a joke to drown in. "You want to drag your family through court? Headlines? Do you intend to be that kind of widow? Think of the children." "You did not," I said. "You pushed their grandmother into a swamp." For a fraction of a second, her face betrayed her. The mask slipped, just enough to see the spine beneath the silk, a length of barbed wire wrapped in ribbon. "If you think you've won," she said, quieter now, looking at me, not Ruth, not the men with their pale outrage, "you haven't. I will walk out of here. I will say it was grief. I will say it was confusion. I will say your lawyer manipulated you. I will say anything. And I will find a way back. Because men like Thomas love women who make a room look expensive. And your son." "My son," I said, and watched Daniel flinch, "is about to decide who he is in front of his children. The decision will not be made by your cheekbones." The officers were quiet when they arrived. They always are when the room is made of wood and someone has made sure there is coffee. They took Ruth's little marvels in careful gloved hands, watched the nicely edited Swamp Symphony on my watch, and asked exactly one question I knew they would ask. "Do you need medical attention, Mrs. Hart?" "No," I said. "I need my husband's will back in the safe." We finished the reading. The words landed like stones in a riverbed. An education trust for Maya and Theo with a clause that made Thomas's eyes crinkle when he wrote it, to be used for any study so long as it teaches them to love the world more than they fear it. A bequest to the foundation to finish the wetlands restoration he'd started when a younger developer had scoffed. The remainder to my wife, who chose me twice, when we were young and when we were old, and who is the reason the docks ever made money, because she made dinner and a life. Sloane sat in a stiff chair between two calm women in uniforms, and for a moment I pitted all the bad math that had added up to this. 15 minutes isn't much if you don't know how to spend it. They didn't cuff her in front of the children. That was for me, because I had asked, and because good people make humanity fit inside rules when they can. They escorted her to the elevator with the kind of gentle firmness you reserve for a storm that's done, but full of lightning still. Daniel didn't speak until the door closed. Even then he spoke to the table, as if his mouth didn't trust the air to hold his words without breaking them. "Mom," he said, and I braced for either apology or accusation. Neither came. "Can I come home?" "Of course," I said, "because there are things you don't punish even when it would be easy. But not to the life you had yesterday." He nodded. "I know. We went home like a family whose seams had been ripped and were now asked to hold." The children sprawled on the rug and argued about whether marshmallows need toasting. Daniel paced the back porch counting his breaths, because a man must count something when his arithmetic fails. I made cocoa because grief likes sugar even when it tells you it doesn't. That night, Ruth sat at my kitchen table and we wrote a new list, this time not of traps, but of fences and garden paths. We called the bank. We called the foundation board. We called a locksmith and then another, because it felt good to hear the bolts turn. And we called a therapist with a waiting list of 7 weeks, who picked up the phone anyway, because Ruth's voice has that effect on calendars. "I'll testify," Daniel said, unprompted, from the doorway. He held his coffee like a confession. "I'll tell them about the hospital, about the papers she brought, about how she asked me if a man could sign when he was sleeping." He looked at his children. "I'll tell them everything. You will also tell them you didn't push me," I said, and his face broke in a way I will forgive him for forever. "You didn't know about the swamp. You need to hear me say that in front of both God and your children." "I didn't know," he said. "But I knew who she was. And I let her be that in my house." "We are going to teach your children something different," I said. "That is the only revenge I respect." The trial never got the glorious mess the internet loves. Sloane pled to lesser charges with a face that had learned humility the way a statue learns rain. There were no crocodiles in the complaint, only attempted battery and a handful of words about fraud that made my teeth ache to read. She qualified for a program that lets first offenders wear beeping jewelry and learn how small their world can be when it is measured in yards from their front door. She lost her license in the profession she cared most about, public relations, and found herself working part-time at a store that sold expensive candles with names that sounded like lies. I have never visited that store. I have never needed to smell remorse called winter linen. What I did do, what I promised Thomas in the slight hitch of breath I made at his graveside when the wind decided it had an opinion, was this: I took his stubborn money and finished the work he began. We built the marsh walkway the right way this time, with rails that make you want to stay, not slip. We endowed scholarships for kids who grew up near the water but never saw a way to study it. We gave the foundations building the only name Thomas would have suffered, a place for work. The lobby plaque reads, "For the long, long time." Daniel moved into the guest house for a while. He drove his children to school and to therapy and to the kind of quiet club a church will sometimes become when it forgives the paperwork long enough to be useful. He told them we make amends with action, not flowers. He learned to make eggs without breaking all of them. He learned to be quiet when it was his mother's turn to speak. One evening in late summer, when the sky did that peach-purple thing it does to make poets bearable, Maya asked me, "Grandma, what did it feel like when you fell?" We were on the new boardwalk, the old one dismantled and remade into benches that don't splinter your good dress. An alligator slid somewhere far off like a rumor that had decided to mind its own business. "Cold at first," I said. "Then quiet." Then I remembered I was not done. "Were you scared?" "Yes. But there are kinds of scared. One whispers you are alone. The other says get up." I listened to the second one. She nodded and held my hand, as if she understood what children sometimes do better than adults, that fear is a compass if you don't use it like a pillow. Theo, who is younger and cares more about the world's mechanics than its poetry, peered over the edge. "Do you think the crocodiles saw you?" he asked. "They're alligators, honey," Maya corrected, rolling her eyes like a teenager she was not yet. "I think," I said, "that the only animal who truly watched me that night was a woman who thought 15 minutes was all she would ever need to be what she wanted." I squeezed their hands. "And I think we are not going to feed any of those animals, are we?" They laughed. And then we sat very still, the way you do in a place that has already tried to take you and failed. A year later, I sold the big house, the one with the safe that had learned how to sing. We moved closer to town into something with stairs my knees can scold and a kitchen that admits it will always smell like toast. I gave the heavy dining table to a family who'd never had a table that didn't wobble. I kept the blue-chipped bowl Thomas used to eat peaches out of. I put the decoy will in a shadow box and hung it in the office with a label Ruth wrote in her neat lawyer's hand. "Likeness, not to be trusted." It makes me smile when I pass, the way a photograph of yourself in a dress you only wore for one impossible summer might. Sometimes I see women my age in the grocery store, moving carefully around the pyramids of oranges as if those things could fall and take them with them. I want to touch their sleeves and say, "There's a root under the water. Grab it." I don't, because you cannot push people into their own rescue. You can only hope they hear their monsters purr in time. Daniel has begun to laugh and mean it. The children whistle like birds that have remembered their names. Ruth comes over every other Sunday, and we watch old movies where the heroine wins without once raising her voice. We cheer for her anyway. As for Sloane, I read her name once in a small notice in the back of the paper, a fine paid, a community service completed with the dignity of a woman who knew she was being watched. I don't look for her. I don't pray for her ruin. I hope she learns to measure her days not in minutes she steals, but in letters she writes for someone who cannot write them alone. She is not welcome in my house. Forgiveness does not require foolishness. But I have no energy left for wishing anyone small. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, we returned to the boardwalk. The air held that fine powder of heat that looks like light until you walk into it. We brought lemon ice for all of us, cups sweating, spoons small. We sat without talking and let the mosquitoes think about it and decide to spare us. The marsh kept being itself, which is all I ever hoped to be. I told the children again what their grandfather wrote in the will, about loving the world more than fearing it. "Even the swamp?" Theo asked, wrinkling his nose in splendid suspicion. "Especially the swamp," I said. "Because it's honest. It will try to take you. It will tell you so. And it will give you something to hold on to if you look." Maya put her head on my shoulder. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby. When I put you in my school essay, about the bravest person I know, can I write about the crocodiles?" "You can write that someone thought they would be there," I said, and tasted lemon on my tongue, and the wind came across the water with enough kindness to make old bones forget their aches. "You can write that I counted to 15 and decided to live longer than that. If you've listened this far, tell me the city you're hearing me from. And if anyone in your life thinks 15 minutes is enough to erase you, remember a woman who came up out of a swamp with marsh in her hair and quiet in her jaw, went home, and turned those minutes into a future no thief could afford."
So another story of my grandmother has ended, and be clicking here you will have when more such stories.